My name is Peter Enlund, and I'm in a peculiar way one of the fathers of this event, together with Stefan Larsen. I am not an expert on life science. My expertise is urban planning, urbanism and such things, and I'm running a project at the foundation since 2002 about these matters. The reason for my involvement in this has to do with the two hosting foundations' history, because Stockholm Science City Foundation is actually funded and founded originally by Axel and Margaret Foundation in the 90s and others. And the purpose was to encourage three universities that are quite close to each other, a bit north of the center, encourage their collaboration with each other and with the industry. Later on, Stockholm Science City decided that life science was a very good topic, unifying topic, common denominator. And I have been at that board since 7-8 years or something. And I discovered after a few years that we had a few board members that wasn't really updated when it comes to life science, to put it mildly. So I talked to Stefan and I said, maybe we should have a little seminar for the board about life science. And he said, yeah, good idea, let's do that. So we started with a seminar 3 years ago, but none of the board members that we had in mind actually showed up to that seminar. But other people did that, and suddenly we have started something really great, this fantastic multidisciplinary and holistic discussion about life science. We are at the Engelsberg Ironworks, which is on the World Heritage List, because we have here on this site a very well-preserved iron factory. Probably the best preserved iron factory of a certain type. We were good at iron production historically. The building you are in now, the Wolf factory, was actually a real factory 5-6 years ago. But we have rebuilt it and transformed it from industrial production to knowledge production. It's quite interesting. We are doing about 35 seminars each year here. And we have many, many activities. I will not take your time going through all of them. But I'd like to mention the Engelsberg seminar, which is one of our oldest projects. We are focusing on the humanities at our foundation. And the Engelsberg seminar gathers international top-level academics discussing very nebulous issues like on Russia or on the idea of America, etc. And this year's theme is Past, Present and Future, which is a very good title because you can put a lot of different type of stuff under that title. And so, yeah. So if you want to know more about our foundation, I strongly recommend you to check our website or talk with us during the coffee breaks. Now I will welcome the chair for Stockholm Science City Foundation.
Thank you very much, Peter. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to have the opportunity to welcome you to the conference, Where is Life Science Heading in the Future? This symposium is arranged jointly by the Axel and Margaret Foundation and the Stockholm Science City Foundation. My name is Cecilia Sjölin Cedergård. I'm the chairman of the Stockholm Science City Foundation, only since a couple of months ago. My background of relevance here is that I'm a PhD in biochemistry, but it's a long time ago. I have worked in Astra and AstraZeneca. I have been on the board of Stockholm University. I have been the chairman of KTH, and I've been the CEO of Karolinska University Hospital. So I know the area rather well. Today I'm the chairman of Göteborg's University. I'm sure that's not a merit just here. And I've been the governor of Gotland for 9 years. So, and I'm succeeding Stefan Larsen, who we have already heard about. And also another one that I would like to present is Ylva Williams, who is the CEO of Stockholm Science City. so you can identify her. Stockholm Science City is an expert organization that facilitates knowledge transfer and strengthen growth. We strengthen relations and increase collaboration between academia, industry, and society to support the development of Stockholm as an attractive place for research and entrepreneurship. Our ambition is to create benefits for society and strengthen Stockholm's competitiveness in the area of science. To succeed this mission, strong, trustful relations is key. We strive to bridge our network in academia, industry, healthcare, and other parts of the public sector. This is why you are so important, all of you here. We are grateful that so many have come here to this symposium to share knowledge, broaden perspectives, and to strengthen networks. So thank you. This is the third transdisciplinary symposium in the series Where is Life Science Heading in the Future? And the documentation from the previous meetings, you can find them on Stockholm Science City's webpage. So thank you also to the host, the Axel and Margaret Ax Foundation. Your generosity to have us here. I'm actually living in a World Heritage, Visby. For those of you who are foreigners, Visby is on the island Gotland in the Baltic Sea. So I'm changing my place here now to another World Heritage. I've seen there are 15 World Heritages in Sweden. I've seen most of them, but not this one, Engelsberg. So I'm very grateful to be here, actually. And so thank you for your contribution, providing opportunities to come closer to an answer. Where is life science heading in the future? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Cecilia, for this introduction. So, my name is Ingrid Heath, and I will be your moderator for these 2 days. And during the last few weeks, I had the pleasure to chat with every speaker that we will meet during this seminar. And, well, I dare to say that you should be prepared to think new thoughts and say hello to the future during these days. Because it might just be that we are fortunate enough to live in a time in history where a medical revolution is about to happen. With everything that's going on within AI and gene technology, we will see new technologies, new treatments that will change the way we think about health and medicine completely. This, of course, demands a lot of the society. We will probably need to make new laws and regulations, have new ethical frameworks, maybe even organize ourselves in new ways. And this is exactly what we will focus on during these 2 days. How can society adapt to science in a way that we get the best out of science and not the worst? And who am I? Well, I have lived with these questions at least the last 15 years. I think my interest in science and policy started when I did my master thesis in molecular biology and examining the attitude towards genetic screening and talking to a lot of thought leaders back then and society. And I have then reported on scientific advances and its implications as a medical journalist for several years, and I served as vice president and director of policy for the Swedish Life Science Industry Organization, working on policy development within life science. And today I work with some of the leading life science companies in Sweden that are in the real forefront of science and helping them to position themselves and communicate with the capital market. So for me, it is a pleasure to get this opportunity to dive into policy, science, ethics, together with some of the real thought leaders in the world for 24 hours ahead of us. And we will begin with the very biggest buzzword of them all, AI, artificial intelligence. And we will begin this afternoon in AI in a more broad perspective, and then we will move on to AI in more specific in healthcare. So I'm very happy to say welcome to our first speaker, who will give us a much needed introduction, I think, to what is actually artificial intelligence and what can we expect. So welcome Magnus Boman, who is Professor of Intelligent Software Systems at KTH Royal Institute of Technology.
Thank you. So here it is. This is the truth. AI, completely buzzword free. It's about learning. So most of the time when you hear people talk about AI, they actually don't talk about learning. They talk about something very fussy. The AI is going to help with something. And the AI is usually a lot of things put in one bucket. And about learning, it's about learning over time and over task. So it means that we can train a system in one domain and then apply it to another domain much later. We can train where it's cheap and apply where it's expensive. We can do transfer learning. We can do work on physical things like robots. This is a picture from Bletchley Park, where they had a competition called the Loebner Prize, where you're supposed to create software that can pass the Turing test so that you can actually fool human judges that you are a machine if you are a human, or vice versa. It started here with Turing. It started with Turing giving a talk in 1951, which was criticized by people at Cambridge for being a smudgy student presentation full of confused ideas. But actually, he's still my hero for this talk. This is the birth. This is where it started. It didn't start in Dartmouth 1956 or anywhere else. It started here. And it wasn't Benedict Cumberbatch-style Turing. It was the real Turing. You cannot make a machine to think for you. This is a commonplace that's usually accepted without question. It will be the purpose of this paper to question it, which he did. So he said things like, an artificial intelligence system could spend its time playing Go, for instance. Not chess. Chess is too difficult. Go is more complex for humans, but simpler for machines. Hence, today, we know that Deep Blue beat Kasparov in 1997, leading us to the next grand challenge having to be formulated. So in 2047, a humanoid robot team is facing Brazil or whatever team it is that is the best in the world in football, and it's going to be FIFA rules. So you have to play by the same rules. But Go, just last year, there was a very hyped up example of what we can achieve with reinforcement learning and so on. Turing anticipated this and a lot of other things. So the main question for the last 24 hours is this one, and I'm therefore picking my examples from the life sciences. And it's not hard for me, because in the last 13 years I worked almost solely, exclusively with applications in the life sciences. So I'm an AI professor at KTH since 16 years. So I did some applications in the financial industries and in robotics, and now it's life sciences for me. So humans make a lot of decisions. What about using AI as some sort of second opinion? Yes, this is feasible. This is a Watson-like system. So IBM formed a separate business unit a few years back, gave them $1 billion and a fancy Manhattan office with a very strange Jeff Koons artwork piece when you enter the lobby. I've been in that building. It's very scary. And this is AI as a second opinion. So a hospital pays a subscription fee and then they pay per consultancy. So there's obviously, whenever there's a second opinion, there's a first opinion. So what if we swap these things? Well, here's something you cannot read, but it's from a recent paper in Nature Medicine, and now maybe some of you can read it in the first couple of rows, but this is just a list of specialties like radiology, neurology, pathology, dermatology, ophthalmology, gastroenterology, cardiology. And how do panels or arrays of machines compete with panels of humans? And these are the scientific papers, the references where humans today are being outperformed by machines. And the most interesting, notable, I think, example is the glaucoma study that came out a few months ago, where there's now 94% accuracy for a single image to say, just classify it positive as a glaucoma example or negative, not the glaucoma example, where humans are way behind. But there's also triaging. So if someone has some sort of medical problem, where to go? Sometimes you can call someone or go to primary care and see a medical doctor. Most of the time, not so. You will be given advice by a nurse. If you are lucky, this nurse will know at least as much as the medical doctor, but most of the time you are not lucky. Therefore, you can consider at least a situation where the first part of the triaging is done by the machine and then the humans take over, the right experts answer. So this is turning the tables a little bit. This is Eve. Eve was born out of Adam, some strange coincidence, maybe, but I don't think so. Adam was born in Manchester and Eve now resides in Cambridge. And Eve is pretty big, so there's a human over there, and Eve is an autonomous laboratory. It can do things like pipetting and more trivial things. So it can do, it can combine wet research with in silico studies. But most of all, it has generated some new ideas. Like maybe if you brush your teeth with certain kinds of toothpaste, it will give you some resistance against malaria. And here are the details. You can study them in the slides later. Eve came up with that. So it's mentioned here. It prepared the titration experiments, it says, but it actually did more. Otherwise, we see examples of AI systems in things like predicting anaphylaxis using machine learning and so on. And they're doing pretty well. But here's something that makes me nervous. So this is actually an explanation of how these medical experts used some quite advanced methods from my area, from artificial intelligence and data science. So they built a word embedding model, which is like a vector space representation of word semantics. That's kind of complicated, especially since it's a very high dimensional space. And then they classified things to do with anaphylaxis cases, so strong allergic reactions, possibly with the deadly outcome, according to all these classifiers. And maybe you tell me if I'm mansplaining this, but it's support vector machines, logistic regression, random forest, multilayer perceptrons, k-nearest neighbor, multinomial naive Bayes. And all of that together with some convolutional neural network predicts with some success. Now, what makes me nervous about this is that the people that built this are not experts on these methods. They are not programmers and so on. They are just very interested in artificial intelligence, and they made this thing fly because they had good data. Now, what we're talking about in the future of AI for the life sciences, truly interdisciplinary approaches, interdisciplinary work, especially when it comes to the ethics of things and explaining why things work and opening up all the black boxes. So I would not be much happier of having these people at my computer than they would be to have me at the surgery. So I think it's a bad idea. So what have you got? What can we do? Well, in London, they have, inside the British Library, they have the Alan Turing Institute, which is a place for people to go, even professors at, say, Imperial College that fight every day in their offices. They're friends when they go to the British Library because they're on neutral ground there. And universities like UCL and KCL that are famously hating each other, they work together there. Well, we have Kungliga biblioteket right where the bus picked us up this morning. Why don't we have an Alan Turing Institute? I've asked a lot of people. Some of you in this room know that I've been around asking people, why don't we have an institute like this? It would be great, because Sweden has some things that we don't have in the UK. And I work part-time in the UK. I know that the data and how we handle it here is in many ways years and even decades ahead. In all fairness, they are years and decades ahead of us in other respects, but they do have the interdisciplinary center. So that's a thought. So what do you need when you think about AI? I could give you a mini tutorial in things like supervised learning, unsupervised learning, semi-supervised learning, but I don't think that's very helpful. I think it's better if we just focus on a few examples. And if we think about these examples of having to do with requirements on things like transparency, interpretability, adherence to laws, and that sort of thing. And I know that the next speaker will get into this area too. From where I am, sense making is the thing. So I can't walk into a clinic or walk into any factory or any company and just say, you're going to boost your productivity or serve your patients better with AI. That's what you get when you open up Harvard Business Review. Then you'll see data science is unlocking the value potential of your data. It's very valuable. In other words, your business model, there's something wrong with it. You need to do more DevOps and things like that. But it won't work unless you have this. So everyone must make posters of this and put up on their wall, and then they're okay. No, but seriously, down here, sense making, it involves a lot of the kind of people that are in this room. So policymakers, I don't know, how many clinicians do we have in this room? Yeah, so I think that's a good representation. So you can argue with me or agree with me later. Up there in the right-hand corner, this part of the picture is the image of life sciences in the future, where our lifestyle and how we feel about things and how healthy we feel is somehow dictated in part by some sort of digital bubble that's around us. So when I'm reaching out for the fish that I don't know is fish, I get the warning for an anaphylaxis. So you shouldn't touch that because you're deadly allergic to fish. Or the water you're just drinking here in Delhi, it's actually coming from that tap over there. So don't drink it just right now. Wait for the infrared to take out some of the things in the water that you don't need, like amoebas and some bacteria and so on. If you talk to people like me normally, when there are only AI experts in the room, they talk about the mathematics and the statistics, right? All the models and the supercomputing. And especially something that spread to Ingrid, you call yourself a science journalist, so you should know that deep learning is the shit. Well, actually, most of the people I work with shallow learning models for good reason, because deep learning is good sometimes and not other times. And the reason is this curse of dimensionality, that we work in very high dimensional models. And already in 3 dimensions, things start to get hard to do on a computer. But you can still take a 3D picture and you can simplify things. But I work with some systems that if we make a deep learning model, it's about 30,000 layers in the model. And that's a very large room to consider mathematically. And even if we do all these simplifications, so a B is actually not a B as the humans see, it's just a triangle. Or that strange hat over there to the left is actually just a 3 to the machine. It's not going to help. We can do quite advanced models, and here's a model of nosocomial infections in Swedish wards, so MRSA in this case. So, I mean, we can do a lot of things, and this was done completely without AI. So you have to remember what I said first, that if it's not about learning, if the model or the system or the method or the algorithm is not improving over time and over task, it's not going to be AI. So just be careful and skeptical whenever someone talks about AI, because they might try to sell you something. Here's the best epidemiologist that ever lived, except that he didn't live, of course. And the connection, I guess, is that Benedict Cumberbatch is here too. He's everywhere. So I worked 10 years as a so-called computational epidemiologist. I used to apologize for not having a medical background until I met some world-famous epidemiologists that told me, neither have I. It's a modern thing that you're supposed to know everything about the beta-lactam ring or something like that. You can be Sherlock Holmes. And the reason is that today, we're in a multimodal world where if we want to give some health guidance to the person on the right there, we have so much possibility to have different kinds of data in streams. So of course we can have sound and we can have image and we can look at the genome and so forth. But not only that, there's the whole world of omics out there, all sorts of omics. And of course, there are large companies working in the same area as I'm doing basic research in, like Google, obviously, to name one. And Google bought a UK-based company called Deepmind, and they used to have a slogan that said, develop general intelligence and then use that to solve everything else. But they changed that. They said, develop general artificial intelligence and then use that to do good. So I'm still with the first slogan. So I'm building Frankenstein's monster. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So machine learning, here are 3 examples of where we work actively in machine learning. So data-driven phenotyping, we track emotions in human faces, and we try to give decision support to people working with cognitive therapies, predicting the outcome. And the step that me and other people are trying to take now is to go from the abstract world of an AI doing things to actually put things into black boxes, much like the black box you already have. If you have a car, you already have a black box traveling around with you. If you're on an airplane, there's another black box and so on. So I want to live in a world where there are more black boxes than today, and I want to take some people's jobs away. So that's just how evil I am. And what we do in these 3 areas is we look at correlations and for experts also, I can say other forms of links in genetic data and behavior, so icing pots models and things like that. We look at how a very mentally ill mother connects or does not connect with her baby, being locked up in a mother-baby unit in a mental hospital and being put in strange situations and filmed and then analyzed. And it sounds like it's a very cruel experiment, but it's been going on since the 1970s without artificial intelligence. And now we have the data set to look at it using artificial intelligence methods. And we have real-time psychologist decision support here at Karolinska Institute, Huddinge. This is so-called IPSI room, the Internet Psychiatry room in Huddinge. And these therapists never meet their patients. So the patients are always on the other side of the computer, basically. So never face-to-face. And Sweden has pioneered this. So we know since the 80s that this form of providing people with CBT that voluntarily sign up for it is at least as good as traditional care and a lot cheaper. So for me as a data scientist, I have all the information about these patients in the sense that it's everything is asynchronous communication between therapist and patient, and everything is logged. Every click is logged. Now we also have their blood. So we have 974 depression patients that have gone through this program, and we've done a genome-wide association study, and we can link everything from neurology to behavior. Or when I say we can link it, I don't mean to say we've found these fantastic causal relations or anything, but at least we have the opportunity to try and look for them. But what I want to do, the dream with this project, which is financed by Vetenskapsrådet and Erling Persson Stiftelse, so the Swedish Research Council and the Erling Persson Family Foundation, so that's the H&M Persson family, that is to actually put a box in this room, a black box that talks to these therapists and that the therapists talk to. Because they already talk to each other, say, can you come over here and look at this? Does this look like a psychosis to you? And then the machine can answer and say, patient 37 is most likely not in a psychosis because, and then give an explanation. The machine has already seen the screen and it's seen a lot more than what the humans see. Now you're going to see a very sad 1-minute film. But don't be sad because she's an actress. So this is an example of an actress trying to evoke a true sad emotion. So she's not in CBT or anything like that. She's just an actress thinking of something very sad. And this is what happens when a human thinks about sad things. Tears fall. When we cry, we look at our own nose. We make a yaw and pitch rotation so that our head moves vis-a-vis our shoulders and we shake. And this is being analyzed more or less real time thanks to the 68 dots that is placed on her face. And they're not physically on her face, they are superimposed on her face afterwards. These are 68 different patch learners. So this dot over here is only thinking about what's going on here. And in a distributed learning system, it is learning together with the other 67 dots in a convolutional neural network. Now, she looks a bit happy at the end. It's not happiness, but it's more like pride that she could actually evoke a real feeling of sadness. So why do we do this? Well, we emit expressions, of course. When you meet a person that smiles at you, you already started to smile back before you understand that this person is smiling. And because of the mapping to the hemispheres in the brain, your natural smile starts 30 milliseconds before, I think it is, in the left corner of your mouth, which means that a machine can analyze what you are doing if it has high frequency video of it. So here is Sven. He's smiling now because he feels a bit ridiculous because this happened. And you can let it roll because this is more fun, right? Yeah, he certainly thinks so. But look at that. That's hard to fake. It's like, you know, you can't really fake that because you can't really open your mouth that wide. It's really impossible. So the machine can say a lot in its analysis of what's going on, and it's looking at his yaw and pitch rotation. Look at the way his head is moving vis-a-vis his shoulders. It's very different from the previous video. You can use this for lie detectors. You can use this for if you want to interview someone and know if they're honest and so on. This is not what we do, but this is a pilot we did for a small startup in Stockholm that are looking at applications for psychodynamical dialogue. So whenever two people are talking to each other, who's in control, who's giving the cues, who's responding, and so on. And that's the same thing as what I'm doing in the mother-baby unit. So the sick mother is asked to play with her baby, and the baby might not want to play, but the mother might not get these cues. And what we analyze there is also a psychodynamical situation. So from machine learning to learning machines, but the list sort of goes on, because what I'm doing now is I'm learning how to program these learning machines. And when I say it's not just me, it's over several projects. And learning how to program learning machines, in order to do that, even Turing knew that you have to educate them. So he used to say, something like a very strict headmaster should educate the machines, he said. And whenever not educated, they should roam the countryside or play Go. And people reading this were like, so machines are going to roam the British countryside and look for experiences and learn from those. It sort of sounds like at least RoboCop sort of scary scenarios going on there. But yeah, this is what I do. So if I were to come up with something, now that I work only at KTH, I own my own idea, so I can patent it if I want to. But then it doesn't stop there, because learning machines could even patent how to educate other learning machines and themselves. So I take this example because recently I was contacted by the Swedish Patent and Registrar Office, and they said, Magnus, we know you since 15 years. We're in a bit of a situation here. We think that you could help us out. We have a strong feeling, we have a gut feeling that very soon someone will come in and file a patent, and this something will not be a person or even a straight judicial person. It will be an AI. And I said, yes, that's very likely. We already have companies in this country that claim they have an AI on the board of their companies and so on. And obviously there's marking in this. So yes, it will happen. And they said, okay, so good, it will happen. What can we do about it? And then I said, that's your problem. It's definitely not mine. And then I went home, and I sort of felt bad about that reply. So I said, okay, let's take a lunch and discuss this. Because this is where the interdisciplinary sort of meeting begin. Because we're in a situation now where a lot of people, not just from my side, but also from the industry side, for instance, autonomous war machines, who takes the responsibility for not unleashing autonomous war machines out there? So the automated sniper is not something you would want to encounter in this park. And I think they should be outlawed. I mean, that's my personal opinion. And a lot of people think they should be outlawed. So, I mean, this is where I think some parts of our discussion at least could start. It's like, what's the agora? Where do we meet to talk about these things? And how much of my stuff do you need to know to do that? And how much of your stuff would I need to know to not be embarrassing to you? So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder, you said you've been an AI professor for 16 years. And I think a lot of us in the room has started to think about AI maybe the last 2, 3, 4 years. What is happening in the development that makes this so much more relevant right now than it was when you started 16 years ago?
Mm. I think a lot of it is about visibility. I mean, people like you making more of it visible, so people have opinions about it. And through popular culture, science fiction has always been a great source of inspiration for AI research and vice versa. So that's one part of it. Another part is that we actually have these superclusters and GPUs and so on, so we can compute. But most of the things they are so hard to compute that it won't matter if we get a factor 10,000 more computational power. So it's more that there's more data now. And most of that data sits with the large companies. So the companies that deal and trade with this data. And all of you know that since about 25 years, it's been very expensive to have up-to-date financial information if you want to act on some sort of stock market or derivatives market. But 10 seconds later, you can more or less get it for free. And we don't think about that so much, but we leave these digital traces when we're, for instance, out on the internet, or we carry around our mobile phones. And this has a lot of value to some people for a very short time. Then it's not so interesting anymore. So it's interesting to see who is keen on exploiting that particular arbitrage. What are they doing? And most of them are not basic researchers. And in Almedalen last year, I said that it's a group of about 800 people all over the world that controls most of these processes. It's not so much more than that. At least it's not 8,000. So just reading newspaper, you might have a feeling that all large companies have AI divisions and AI responsible this and that. But when I walk into Google New York or Spotify New York or Watson, I recognize most of the people there because we go to the same conferences and we write similar papers, and I'm not comparing one to the other.
And how much ethics are you discussing in these communities?
Yeah, there are several discussions going on in parallel. So one discussion is very open. It started with people like Max Tegmark and Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk saying, putting the finger up, this finger. There's another finger that I won't put up, but they put up this finger saying, you have to be very, very careful with AI because basically it's going to do you harm. And most of us went, wouldn't it be cool if our software was so powerful that it could actually do some of the things that those guys are afraid of? But we also listened and said, okay, maybe there's a good time to talk about ethical codexes and behaving in anticipation, because I worked in, as I said before, in physical robotics, and our research was motivated by sweeping landmines from a particular field, but it didn't take much modification to actually use it to optimally place out these landmines instead, so they would maximize damage to anyone that went out into that field. And that and other things made me realize that it's not an application area that interests me anymore. There were other things as well, but it's sort of scary how small modifications you need to do. So
are you scared? But
well, if you don't know what the limitations are with technology, you are scared. So I was scared of my own genome for a while, and you mentioned that as well. I was at TED in 2008, I think, in Monterey, and one of the regulars at TED, his girlfriend had just started a company called 23andMe. So she gave me an envelope saying, just spit here and you get a WGS. And I was like, no thanks. But now I wouldn't do it because I know it's rubbish. But it's back then I thought it was for real. So then I was scared. But the more you know, then you realize.
Will this happen with AI as well? We're scared, but it's rubbish.
Well, you might say I started, my interest in this area started in the 17th century or something when I was very young, and I thought about, well, maybe I was 16 and I thought, I need to read up on AI because this is scary. But it takes some time to take a course in AI when you're 16 is hard. Oh, sorry, it was hard. Now you can just go to the internet and take a MOOC course from MIT or something, and it's great. So hopefully that will take away some of the fright that people can get from new technology. And not all new technology is good. We had this thing called the car. Remember that? Oh, it's still here. The compact disc, So it happens. Something comes and it's like, whew, this is great, and everyone's using it, and then it turns into something else. That's why I don't like the revolutionary bit, because there is nothing special about these times. So I work with a historian of technology, and she always reminds me, whenever I say something like that, what you said in introduction, she's like, no, stop saying that. Look at these charts. There's nothing special about 2019.
Okay. We'll see.
Maybe she's wrong, and you're right.
And we will dive further into the social and ethical questions in this. And I will welcome next speaker, which is Stefan Larsen, who for some reason sits in the back. Just welcome back up here. You are Associate Professor in Technology and Social Change at Lund University, and you have given this quite a lot of thought. Welcome.
Yes. Oh, yeah, thanks. I like that, Magnus, you talked about creating Frankenstein's monster, a reference to Mary Shelley 200 years ago, with the subtitle, The Modern Prometheus. So kind of the Promethean promise, which has been talked about in terms of AI too. The fear of something that's so strong that you can do so much good with it, also do so much bad with it. Maybe the reference to landmines or autonomous weapon systems is there too. And some people have compared AI or talked about AI in terms of like nuclear research, that you could, powerful energy source, also a bomb that could change, altered history of mankind as we know it. So that the question is in the air: is it that strong? I don't know. Learning technology, I think I will focus. My argument here as a social scientist is that I want to strengthen the link between AI and society. So if we think in terms of particularly perhaps machine learning as something data dependent, we are the data in a sense. What does that lead to? So strengthening that, also some examples on the bias debate, which is some of the bias in terms of discrimination, that type of bias, and transparency issues. Who should know or see or have insights in the products or the AI processes being developed. So the transparency issue is also key for any governance debate, and we are increasingly having those in EU and in Sweden. How should we steer this development? Who should steer it? We recently saw the paper from the EU Commission's expert group on AI that published ethical guidelines on trustworthy AI, which is really some sort of policy making document that's of interest in terms of, how do you steer it? What kind of ethical guidelines, or what type of accountability and what type of transparency should be imposed on development of AI? So I'm a social scientist. I'm a associate professor at LTH, the engineering faculty in Lund. So I'm a social scientist amongst engineers. I study new technologies, but not as an engineer, but as a lawyer and social legal scholar, I would say. I get 2 PhDs, which I wouldn't recommend, but I feel like a sociologist of law, basically. So lawyer, but not dogmatic lawyer, and studying the role of law in society. So also interesting when it doesn't work. So when law is failing, it's just as interesting as when law is the solution to something. I also am a scientific advisor for Consumer Agency of Sweden and a newly formed AI Sustainability Center, which is, we're trying to figure out processes to make AI development more ethically aligned, which I find is really interesting. I'm gonna base my talk in some of my most recent publications. I've been studying what we call the platform society, or the dependency that we all as sort of citizens and consumers have on platform-style companies. So we all are sort of depending on and making use of Google services, Apple carrying phones around, and what that means in terms of empowerment, but also in terms of how are we paying for that, perhaps by our data, and how do we regulate that, and the issues kind of coming from that. So, and most recently this inventory where we looked at, okay, who's studying the ethical dimensions and the legal dimensions of AI, what is happening in the scientific field, and we saw that, okay, the last 5 years or so, there's an increase in studies in that sort of ethical or sustainable AI perspective, written with computer scientist Friedrich Heinz and Anna Fellander and our friends at Ericsson Research, as well as Li Tsai, which some of you in the medical field at Karolinska might know. So, okay, so first setting the perspective. There's a debate going on right now in terms of what is great AI? Who's making the best tools? How do we invest and strategize so we get a good AI development going? This is more of a political debate, but we tend to compare US with China, with Europe, and say that these notions in Europe, talking about ethics and trustworthiness and trust, is a hindrance for the development of great AI. That's one argument. I would argue in another way that we should resist when defining what's good AI, if you can do that. We should resist or complement the computer scientific notion of AI in a sense. So you construct tools in a sense, but as they get applied, when we use them in search engines or in healthcare, if they're great or not will depend on how it's correlating to the societal needs, so our values, or how we think in terms of ethics, or how we regulate this specific field. So is it consumer interests? We have to kind of mitigate the tools with the values where they're used. So this is an argument from a social or socio-legal perspective, saying that society should be in the loop. For those of you who think in terms of programming, human in the loop, this is a sort of a grander statement that the social contract with new technologies is this kind of wider picture, borrowing from a US researcher called Rawan. So this is my perspective, right? It needs to be tested or evaluated towards things that we already have in place. So do we feel it's legit? And we have a bunch of regulations that most people feel is legit, like discrimination, anti-discrimination law, or consumer protection, or data protection. And the question in the air right now is, how do they relate, or how should we reinterpret them in terms of possibly autonomous technologies that shift over time and learn and improve, possibly autonomously, which is a question partly in the air right now. So this is a slightly different perspective then. Since this is an introductory talk, we talked about setting the playing field in a sense that, okay, everyday use of AI, how should we understand that? And this is not a scientific list of proven high stakes versus low stakes, but it's an idea that we should, to understand the impact of AI in all of its nuances, compared to how what's the impact of it, how serious is it if it fails, for example. Magnus, you mentioned weapons system, which is a debate amongst Max Tegmark and maybe like an ethical debate. Maybe we shouldn't even develop those types of systems. And I would easily argue that that's a really high stakes game. If we have multiple countries developing autonomous weapon systems, and if they are set off, we might have like a global war. That's kind of the highest stake, I would say. But compare it to everyday practices of using Spotify, a recommendation system, and they have this little radio function that tries to figure out what I like. And it seems to be improving, and it seems to be getting more and more sophisticated. And they compare playlists, they compare what my clicks, the human in the loop thing, I can provide with data so they can predict my, likings in that. And Netflix and others are doing that too. But it's kind of low stakes, right? So Spotify doesn't, if Spotify doesn't, understand that I really don't like opera, or I don't understand opera, I can't listen to it. I don't know how to, to like it. But it is not that bad if they, recommend that. But when you move up the kind of field, the insurance industry is also looking into improving the risk assessments, of course, because risk is what they do. And they could mitigate pricing models towards more and more individual risk assessment. Then it might shift sort of the industry's notion of how to assess risk, which traditionally would be more on group level, could be towards more of individual level. And insurance is, is societally a very important industry, and if it goes wrong, we have a problem. And all the way up to health. And health, of course, is a wide field, but some issues, some parts of health is just straight off life and death choices, and if it goes wrong, it's high stakes, of course. So just have this kind of, the takeaway here is that it's probably good to have a notion, especially in terms of governance, so where you should put your efforts into, where you should govern more or have more transparency, if that's the way to solve it. It's good to have this kind of high stakes, low stakes assessment, a focus on the high stakes, I'd say. And the other one takeaway would be, okay, this is a notion. I mean, I'm not sure computer scientific or math skilled AI researchers would say that all of them are doing AI right now, but they are looking into it, and there is in a sense an everyday aspect of at least machine learning that's we are interacting with on an everyday level just through our phones and all the stuff we use online. So it's not a future. In this case, it's not a future, fear or anything. It's now. Okay, that would be the playing field. Looking at this report, we made 3 different types of inventories. I'm going to focus the first one because I want to provide with some terminology so we can sort of have a conceptual ground when we talk later. These are terminologies there's a growing insight in the critical machine learning or autonomous systems literature, focusing on that some of the outcomes might be biased. Now, for those of you who deal with statistics, bias is a kind of it has many definitions, but bias in terms of from a legal perspective would be something bad, right? So bias from a legal perspective would be discriminatory outcomes. I'm going to show a few examples of that. Accountability should always be in the room. So especially when the things get more and more autonomous, then we have to figure out how to deal with accountability. So, for example, a Tesla car crashes while in autopilot. Who should be responsible? Well, legally, in some of those cases, it might not be hard. Okay, the producer of the car. We don't care about the driver. But then we have multiple cases that would be like, okay, the driver interfered somehow. Maybe the accountability should be shifted towards the driver. Or then you have cars where one producer does the hardware, the Volvo car, another one is developing the software, Uber, and then you have the one who's walking by who's behaving in a weird way, and then you have a safety driver that should do something. And then suddenly it becomes more complex, and legally you need to have pretty clear ideas on how to distribute accountabilities for those things. And also, it's also important in terms of trust for new technologies, and also important in terms of innovation. So if you don't have a clear-cut model for distributing accountability, people wouldn't invest in that type of development probably, because it could be too expensive. I'm going to focus bias and transparency issues. Misuse is always in part of the room. It should be. Talking about landmines. If you develop something that could be used to not take away landmines, but also to place landmines, maybe you should have that notion as a developer present. So how could this be misused? And that's sort of a debate going on too on face recognition, for example, where Microsoft CEO says that maybe it can be misused in so many ways that maybe it should be regulated. So, okay, bias can be understood in different angles. I'm going to show you 2. Where one is this, just to focus the link between society and AI. So the training element of AI. Now, machine learning and, for example, image recognition is highly depending on having images that you know what's in them, so labeled images. And ImageNet is one of those databases with a lot of images saying, okay, this is a banana, this is a kitten. So when you train your algorithms on that, they pick that up. But then there are, of course, when people critically assess that database, they state that, okay, but the images tend to come from certain areas in the world, leading to that if you train your algorithm on that, when they look at new images, they see if they see a white dress, it will say this is a bride, this is a bridal dress. But when they look at a North Indian bride on an image, it would label it as a performance art or costume. And there are more examples to that. But so the argument is here, okay, so there might be like a cultural bias in the labeled databases. In this case, leading to an Amerocentric and Eurocentric representation bias. So they argue that we should probably have a assessment of geodiversity, so that underlying databases more representative of the world. So this is an argument saying that, okay, biases in the world might reproduce in the databases. And this is not such a, weird outcome, but other studies show that, okay, some commercial image recognition services are less accurate on women and dark skin. So, okay, that's a general statement in a sense. What does that mean? Well, it could mean, the outcome could be stuff like, it doesn't recognize all sorts of faces. Some faces might be less precision on. So thin Asian eyes to be closed. And there are a bunch of those examples, like with cameras recommending Asians to open their eyes, So that would be more of a, racist undertones. It's not meant to be, it's not designed to be that, but it might be an outcome of a training database that's skewed towards different types of skin tones. And worst case would be like a photo app tagging Black Americans as gorillas. And then you could probably have a chief data scientist saying, oh, but it's depending on the training database, or flaw. But it's PR-wise, it's kind of not bad. It's not good. Sorry. Another question here I would like to raise is not relating as much to how the databases, because the counter argument would be, okay, we need more representative databases, right? So we train on better data, which is a bunch of developments aiming for. And but one argument here would be that, what about when the world is biased? So we are the biased ones. We produce biased data that we might not be proud of, and we try to regulate away. So we have anti-discrimination laws, but still, even in a country like Sweden, we have different salaries for the same job between men and women, right? So we are unequal, and society in different groups might provide with a bunch of skewed or biased views of the world, and it might be racists, or there's a Twitter example with Nazi arguments that kind of the Twitter bot picked up. So the problem here would be, like this study found, that there's a gender bias in this underlying database, which means that the machine learning software not only kind of mirrored that, but also amplified it. So whenever there was a human in the kitchen, it would be even more strongly suggest that it's a woman. So that's a bias. But if that bias is actually part of the world, then the problem would lead to more of a normative question. Okay, you design something that's going to pick up and learn from the world, and the world is biased. When do you need to interfere with that bias? So you could pose that question as, should AI reproduce the world as it is, in a sense, when we are the training data, or as we want it to be? So we want it to be equal. The hard part is that then you need to have really good ideas on what is equality. You need to have good ideas on cultures and ethics and human rights and all those sort of things that we as society struggle with trying to define. And it probably has to be present in the design process, right? And large search engine companies get accused of this from time to time. And it probably is going to be a problem every time you automate something that picks up stuff from the world. There's another service with automated job ads that was shown to a high extent provide men with higher paid job ads than women. And it was not this, it wasn't intended to be like that, but that was kind of the case in the world, and it just reproduced it. Transparency. Transparency is a big part in much of the ethical debates around AI right now, not the least in terms of IEEE or the guidelines for trustworthy AI within EU expert group. And there's a bunch of arguments that's good for why you should have transparency. The problem is that, which I will show in the next slide, is that transparency is not a one-fits-all solution. You can't just say that if we just understand all the processes, it will be fine. It doesn't work like that. But still, user trust arguably is somehow connected to transparency. So we as users understand at some level how a product works, right? I'm not going to drive that argument longer right now, but still. And when you need to validate a product, or when you need to find what's malfunctions, or when you need to point fingers legally, you did wrong, then you need to have some sort of transparency or traceability from what kind of created the flawed outcome, right? The problem is that, and this is more of a within AI research, when you talk about explainability, when you use or implement or apply machine learning in its various nuances on markets, you deal with other kind of values that would be pulling in different directions. One would be the proprietary setup. So you have IP rights, for example, which is sort of a secrecy right? You don't want to show your secret sauce because your competitors might take it. It's part of the market structure as we know it right now. It would not necessarily help transparency, right? Sometimes it's not even good for the purpose of the product to be transparent. So when Twitter showed more of how they devised the Twitter trending, they had a Twitter trending tool, and when they showed more how that worked, people started to gaming it because there are incentives to be showed high on that list. And the same goes with I don't know, Försäkringskassan, the Swedish social welfare, they also have sort of a profiling tool, and they just written a report that we don't want to show exactly how we profile people to find out who's given the welfare, because that would lead some elements to try to game our way of distributing benefits. So that's also an argument. Coming up from more of the humanities is also user literacy. This is not necessarily computer scientists assessing machine learning, but when you place it in a market or in front of a profession, it could be a doctor, a patient. Somehow, people need to understand to some extent what it does. So if you get a recommendation saying, yes, you like this song, or you will most likely get cancer, it will depend on how people understand or interact with this autonomous product. And the same goes with search engines. And also for it's not easily translated all the time. Especially Magnus talked about really complex, multi-layered models. And you have to, if you want to translate that into legal lingo, for example, it has to be some sort of, statistical, mathematical being into some sort of contract lingo, which is a translation. It has to lose aspects of the first. It would depend on language and metaphors, right? And the last two would be more on, especially if you don't really control where your data comes from. For example, Google and Facebook is part in a global data collecting market. Even if they don't tend to sell their data, they are depending on an ecology of collectors. So the pixels and the cookies on all the web pages is part of, collecting data from us. And that type of market complexity makes it really hard to trace back, okay, where did the data come from? Where did it travel? All of these affects the transparency when you use autonomous technologies, especially in markets or applied. The last one would be, for example, from a consumer agency perspective, if they want to find out if ads are presented in a bad way, and the ads are presented within each and every one of us Facebook feeds, for example, it would be extremely distributed, and they don't have access to that. It would be really hard for them to figure that out because it's too distributed. So the second to last slide would be AI not as a tool optimizing or solving problems, but leading to more of a governance issue, right? You have to balance interests. And the interest could be arguably benign. You could have a bunch of good interests, but not necessarily compatible. One argument going that you need access to data to innovate, to create sharp products within AI. That could be translated probably to health sector as well. But on the other hand, you have traditional regulation on privacy and data protection, particularly strengthened by the GDPR, which emphasizes each and every one of us should, have a self-determination. I decide. I have a right to know. I have a right to understand. I have a right to be forgotten even. So those are kind of arguably good interests, but not necessarily compatible. The same thing with trade secrecy or IP rights. It's a good. You can easily argue that you want to protect your innovation, but it's not necessarily compatible with user trust to public governance. So you have supervisory authorities who want to look into, are they doing what they should do? And the same sort of issue, which much of the argument or the principle behind access to user data or patient data could be under public interest. So it's good for society that we do research in this field. You don't necessarily need consent from each and every one, but then you translate that or commercialize that into a product which is not necessarily in the public interest. So there's possibly a gray area that we need to figure out, especially when we use more data sets, bigger data sets, where we can't really ask everyone on consent, but it's not necessarily on a public interest. So that would be balancing of interest. That's the tricky part. And the last slide, 5, what I've already said, summaries would be, okay, I argue that AI has been around for a long time, but only recently, a few years, it seems to be in an expanded use. So we carry AI around. When I unlock my phone, it checks that it's my face. When I use Spotify, it recommends me stuff every Monday. And we are here because we also are interested in, healthcare and autonomous technologies or self-learning technologies. So it kind of gets more and more high stakes. So it's more important that we get it right. The normative aspects, I'm really keen on stressing that, because it's not necessarily so that one central smart designer can understand how to balance those interests, because it could be a normative decision. What's fair, socially fair, it's more of a normative thing or a political thing. From a governance perspective, the balancing of interests is, it's the game. So you have public interests that want to have insight into what's being developed. You have commercial interests. You need to be able to have commercial interests, of course. But then you have also a whole set of regulations on, protecting my rights, my data protection, my privacy. So that balance is constantly debated, not the least in the light of the GDPR and autonomous decision-making, stuff like that. To me, as a research field, it speaks for the need to combine different types of competence, especially the normative aspect. It's not necessarily something you can optimize, but you have to. We have disciplines that have been studying ethics and law for millennia almost. So try to draw some of that knowledge and add it on the more sophisticated computer scientific. So the hard part is to make us meet and talk to each other and understand each other also. And lastly, and I wouldn't say that transparency can solve anything, but it's linked to user trust, and it's often linked in the literature to accountability. So if you want to, talk about who's responsible for what, or say who did wrong, you need some sort of transparency. And I think the key issue is to figure out how we can trust stuff that we don't really understand, but can use the benefits of anyway. Magnus used the car example, and most of us every day use stuff we would never understand how that really works, but we have devised a way societally to prove that they are fair enough. We can trust them and use the benefits of them, so we understand them, or someone understands them, or we have ways to prove that they are good enough. So trust would be one of the key to figure that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. I wonder, some of these challenges, you could see them without AI, especially in life sciences. We are used to risk-benefit analysis, for example, and we have a lot of patent issues and the transparency questions. But the questions isn't new in that sense. What would you say is the new flavor in AI that demands some kind of new thinking?
That's a great question. I mean, especially, I often get the question, what about the jobs? We're going to lose jobs. Okay, we've been talking about that since like 1730s.
I don't think we will talk about
when the spinning jennies came, right? So that's always sort of, when a new technology changes the conditions in society, it will lead to rearrangement of positions, and will be power struggles and all sorts of things. But the newness to this, I would argue, is we have never been this data collected. We have never been quantified as much before. So there's never been as much data on all of our detailed everyday lives as now. So that's kind of the basic foundation for what's new now. And then you, on top of that, figure out ways to make autonomous decisions, so that things, in a sense, attain agency. They can make decisions, which is probably the new challenge and strength, because take a look at all the decisions we have to make all the time. So if we would be informed about them, it would include all the click wrap agreements. It would be 400 agreements, and would be, should I open the door? Should I not open the door? So we always need kind of aid and guidance in making decisions. And in a perfect world, with personalized anything, it would be like we would guide it in all our decisions. So we need some sort of guidance in that, and lack of being informed, and lack of making all those decisions. But the hard part is that when we, give away that agency, something else can make bad decisions for us too.
How would you say? Are we in a hurry when it comes to these questions, or can we wait and see?
That's also, I often hear the sense of urgency is here. And it makes me think of that. I think that to some in some fields, it's probably urgent. For example, practically, we are moving now in the sense that all member states in the EU need to have a strategy for AI. So that's just being imposed on us as nations. So we need to do that now and figure out some good ways, and some decisions can be made now, but not in 10 years. And probably on the higher stakes, I would say that we should focus them. But then there are other things, maybe ahead of my understanding. I don't really understand the superintelligence debate. So I think, and I might be proven wrong, and the machines will take me for it. Some of those debates we could probably wait with. We have everyday decisions right now in terms of GDPR. How much should we know and understand when we decide over my data? That would be probably now, but not all of the debate. So sense of urgency in some cases, probably not all.
Thank you so much for this.